Hello and welcome to the Rejuvenate podcast. I'm your host, Chrissy Hawks, and I'm here with my co-host, Elwyn Robinson, the creator and founder of Genetic Insights and the Rejuvenate Blueprint. And lovely listeners, as always, thank you so much for joining us. We know your time is precious. And please remember, we love bringing this to you. If you can support our sponsors, that supports this podcast, and we are able to continue to bring you this information at no cost to yourself. So please remember to hit that like and subscribe button and that bell icon so you don't miss an episode. Elwyn, it's great to see you. So tell me, what is on your mind today and what are we talking about?
Hi, Chrissy. Yeah. Well, on my mind today, I saw a comment underneath the episode on depression that came out recently, and it really made me think because the person made a very good point, and it's one that I want to address. See, we've done over 100 episodes now, and in the Rejuvenate Blueprint, which I've talked about many times, I think, but I'll give people a quick reminder. I've identified that there are ultimately 7 root causes of chronic disease, all chronic disease. And when there is chronic disease that someone can't fix or can't fully resolve, it almost always comes down to, in my experience, that they've missed something, and often they've missed a whole part of the Rejuvenate Blueprint. So if I explain what they are very quickly as a reminder, not a full explanation. So there are genetic factors, there is a lack of building blocks, often called nutrients, that are required for health. There is an excess of toxins, sometimes it can also be nutrients, but just an excess of anything that the body struggles with. That can be a root cause. There are hormonal imbalances and other imbalances, like with neurotransmitters. We normally focus on hormones primarily. That's number 4. Number 5 is lifestyle factors, especially things like sleep, stress, light environment, and movement. Number 6 is chronic infections. And number 7 is psychological/emotional factors. And I was trying to think earlier, we've probably done the most episodes on hormones, maybe second most on genetics and nutrients. But I think we've only done 1 or 2 episodes on that last one, the psychological/emotional root cause of disease. And I feel like it's time to address it a little bit more. Maybe I haven't done it because I know it's not super popular, except for in certain circles. People like to hear kind of practical things, and to be honest, I do too. But it is true as well that often there is a significant emotional or psychological block going on for people to heal. It's not saying that it's necessarily the only cause, although sometimes it is, especially if people have had a lot of trauma, or they're still going through a lot of trauma. But it's one of the things that can stop you healing. So I wanted to talk about it today and talk about and I'm going to give top 10 tips or whatever. I'm going to go a little bit deep dive into what I believe to be still the number 1 technique that can help to address and even reverse that psychological/emotional root cause. But I'm not just going to kind of try and sell it. I'm also going to talk about all the problems around this technique and why, even if you may have heard it many times before, you might be put off, as I was for a long time, from doing it. So I want to talk about the problems around it, and then I'm going to say why I would still recommend it, but the way that I would recommend doing it, because I think a lot of people actually do it the wrong way as well. So let me share the comment underneath the depression video first, I guess, to set the scene. So the comment, the depression video, I talked about the 3 root causes of depression, which I would consider to be hormonal imbalances, lack of cellular energy, and the neuronal, neurological components, so basically the habits that we have of thinking. And a person put a comment underneath saying, I think a lot of depression is caused by work in this insane rat race we are living in. And I think it's a good comment. So I guess what this person is saying is everything that I identified, the 3 root causes of depression, were all things that are inside of you that you have control over and that you can change. And this person is, I think, correctly, certainly from their point of view, acknowledging, well, wait a minute, what about the external things that can make you depressed? Um, like, a tough life. And the way that I interpreted this was, and maybe I'm being a bit dramatic with this wording, but I don't think so. Like, what about if your life is just a struggle to survive, right? Because that is actually what um, the majority of people in this world are going through right now, right? I know, some statistics that in the US and the UK, where I know we have a lot of viewers, I don't know the exact figures in other countries that are listening, but it's probably similar. Over 50% of people cannot afford like a $500 emergency. So what does that mean? Like, most people are dead broke. They are living, paycheck to paycheck, month to month, and it's a struggle to survive. And this person may not even be talking about this. I don't know. Maybe when they say insane rat race, they were talking more about like among the ambitious, the insane rat race to, I don't know, keep up with the Joneses, to have status, to have a nicer car, to have a nicer house or whatever.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of pressure around that these days. Especially, we seem to be a society of consumption as well, and it's just like it's that space that's like you're always moving to the next. You gain that one thing, and then it's like, okay, now what's next? And there's always that pressure to get more, get to the next step, and forward, and just keep doing that.
Absolutely, yeah. So I think, as I said, for over half the population, life is genuinely a struggle to survive. But then, as you said, for a significant other portion of the people who that's not really the case for, it still feels like it because of, as you said, all the pressure that's placed on them from others, but really, a lot of time that they're placing on themselves to get to the next level. And I think the world of personal development often actually feeds into that. And that's one of the criticisms I would have of the personal development world, even though I think it can be really helpful and it certainly did help me. There are a bunch of traps within it, and I think that is one of them potentially. Setting goals is great in theory. Um, and so it stimulates dopamine, but like dopamine in the presence of a lack of some of the calming hormones and neurotransmitters like GABA, for instance, is just kind of frustration and stress. Like, so meaning if you never satisfied with what you have and you're always trying to get more, you're trying to get to the next level, and this could be financially, but it could also be in terms of status. It could be in terms of beauty, level of enlightenment, education, friendship. Like there are all kinds of dimensions that people are trying to be better in. And whatever it is for you, that kind of I'm not good enough. I need to get to the next level. So I think that the rat race is very broad, but I'll limit myself a little bit about talking about the financial one because in this day and age. There are a lot of people, and this day and age, you could say maybe throughout history, it's like arguable, um, but I think the wealth disparity is pretty significant. Even if you could, the people who like to talk about the positive, which I think there's value in, would say, even the average person these days has more resources available to them than the kings and queens of old, which is true technically in a lot of ways. Um, but it's also true to say the disparity between rich and poor may be larger than it's ever been. And it's also true to say, and I think, well, it's definitely true to say, and I think this is more significant, the awareness of disparity is so massive because of the internet and social media and all the rest of it. Before, if you were a peasant, then probably you didn't have very much and your life sucked. But like, you would rarely meet someone who is wealthy. There's probably one noble family who owned the land you lived on, and maybe you saw them, but they would feel so different and separate from you that often they were treated as if they were completely different species even. And so you wouldn't necessarily have this constant feeling of I should be in this position, where, and that was actually the opposite was encouraged to people. Everyone was encouraged to accept the place that they've been given, maybe by God or whatever. These days, it's like, why aren't you rich? Why aren't you successful? Why aren't you whatever? So there's a lot of pressure people put on themselves. And there's a lot of real pressure, as I say. I'm not oblivious to that over half the people have genuine, like if they miss one paycheck or if they get one big bill, they are screwed. That is there's a lot of that as well, of course. And so I was thinking about that comment as like, and that is a depressing situation. It's a depressing situation, living paycheck to paycheck, knowing that if there's any significant expense that you're not going to be able to pay it. And it's a depressing situation, knowing that you can never take a break or whatever without everything falling apart. That you have to have your job and you have to keep working, and a lot of people don't enjoy their work. So I understand all that. And so my question in my mind is like, okay, I missed that in that previous episode. I wasn't talking about that. Why not? And is this person right? And I would say that they are right within what they were talking about, but I do think there is a way out of that. And so that's what I want to talk about. So is it true that depression is, or a lot of depression is caused by this situation? I think yes, but I think it's also true the other way around. I think the situation is caused by depression. So it's a chicken and the egg situation. Now, which comes first? This depends a lot on what your perspective is. If you are a materialist, and a lot of people are, it's kind of the default these days. Very unusually, as far as we know, most of our ancestors, and honestly still a lot of non-Western cultures throughout the world right now, they are not materialists. They are not material world first. They actually believe in something else, whether it's the spirit world or the religious kind of thing, whatever it may be. They see that as primary and this world as secondary. I gave examples, right? If you have a certain life, it's because of karma, or it's because of dharma, or it's because of God's will, or it's because you've offended the spirits or pleased the spirits. Like throughout a lot of the world right now, that's still their interpretation of why you're in the life situation you're in. Right or wrong, that's how they see it, genuinely. But that's not how we see it. We tend to see it as this is in the Western world. We tend to see it as this is the way it is. Some people, I think if people genuinely believe, though, any of the examples I just gave, then there wouldn't be as much stress and frustration around it. Like if you genuinely believed, okay, my life sucks, I've got to struggle every day, but it's because I did something bad in the previous life, or it's because God wanted it. Like there wouldn't be the level of stress and frustration that a lot of people, and depression, right? There would just be, oh, well, this is, the way it is, like you do see in some cultures. We don't experience that. And I think part of it is because we do have that more materialist view. And the materialist view says that that your level of consciousness is dictated by your physical material surroundings, which is what this person is showing in this comment. I think a lot of depression, which is a subjective inner world experience, is caused by working the insane rat race, which is an external material reality. So they're saying the external material reality causes the level of consciousness that people are experiencing. So, I'd say, yeah, those are two fundamental ways of thinking. There is the way of thinking that says consciousness, whether you want to call it God, the spirits, your own subconscious, which is more the language they like to use in, personal development, stroke psychology. But whatever, like something non-material creates your circumstances, and or the other way round, that your circumstances create this level of consciousness, this state, this feeling within yourself. Does that make sense, Chrissy? So it's like either the objective makes the subjective or the subjective makes the objective, just to really boil it down. And so, actually, before we go on, what's your feeling on this? What do you feel? Which causes which primarily?
I believe it's your state of mind causes your external reality.
Okay, right. So there you go. Fair enough. So the subjective ultimately has more causal effect over the objective.
Yeah.
Or
No, that's
at
what
least, at least
that
your own objective reality.
exactly. It's like
Yeah.
that's my belief. Now, does the material world get me caught up in it and I'm suddenly down some rabbit holes and anxious and everything? Yes. Then I have to come back to, oh, okay, hang on a second. Let me just check myself and recapitulate. But yeah, so that's my belief.
Absolutely, and I do believe you, based on my experience of you, and I can explain why that is a little bit more maybe in a bit. But so so fair enough. Now, which is true, as as I said, if you listen to a lot of religious or spiritual perspective, especially from other cultures, or if you listen to the personal development world, sometimes the psychology world, um, they will also have that perspective that your inner experience will create your outer world. There was that thing, the law of attraction, manifestation, all of that kind of stuff, right? And now that's distinct a little bit from the traditional religious kind of stuff, I guess, in that there's very much an element of choice in it implied, right? You can change your external environment by changing your inner world. But one thing at a time, I guess. First of all, I'm talking about, does the inner world create the outer world, or vice versa? So I would say I'm not 100% married to one perspective or the other. Like, which comes first? Is it the material world, or is it the subjective inner world? I think, as you just said, Chrissy, they influence each other significantly. I think there is a trap in being too focused on either side. I think the trap of being too focused on the material world is that you end up feeling depressed um, and helpless. The material world is so large and so unyielding, so solid, so uh, following its own laws and dictates, that if you take your cues from the objective material world outside you primarily as to how you should feel, as to what your inner state should be, um, you will inevitably feel bad, like to some degree. If you have no connection with your internal world as being primary, at least, if it's just like, I'm going to take all my cues from the external world, because a lot of the I called it Gnostic in a recent episode, a lot of the kind of perspectives on the material world, like on its own merits, are accurate. That it's kind of, nature can be cruel, nature can be kind of ruthless, brutal, all of these kind of things. There is a survival of the fittest to some degree. There is the law of 80/20. That privilege absolutely does exist. Some organisms are born with everything going for them, and some organisms are born with very little going for them, and that's not fair, but it is nature and it is reality. So looking at things from a purely material perspective, unless you happen to be very, very blessed, can be depressing. And even if you are very blessed, even if you're born clever and good looking and charming and have everything going for you, life can still seem kind of empty, and then, you can still be lonely because it's hard to relate to everyone else who's struggling more than you. I remember meeting someone who was kind of in that position. The first person I met who I felt was like not really traumatized. They had great parents who really encouraged them and didn't make them feel bad in any way and all the rest of it. And I was fascinated by this person, and they're a public person. You probably have heard of them. And I, in the health world anyway, and I asked them lots of questions. And And I said, what's it like? And they said, it's really hard to relate to and understand most people. I was like, they weren't complaining. They obviously their main thing was gratitude, and that's really what they were operating from. But you could say, well, it's easy to operate from a state of gratitude if you've been so blessed by genetics, been so blessed by your upbringing, and they acknowledged that as well. They were a very humble person, from what I remember. They were not arrogant either. They were great. But it's hard to relate to most people. So what I'm saying is, that's the material world. There is a lot of inequality and cruelty and stuff in the material world. And so if you take all your cues from the material world as to how you should feel, unless you're especially blessed, and sometimes even if you are, you're going to feel bad, basically. I know for myself, if I was still taking my cues for how to feel from the material world, I don't know if I'd even still be here. I don't want to, go into it more than that. But I really did not enjoy life at all while I was in that mode. And so I guess I'm sounding like I'm like super privileged now. Let me just clarify, I'm not independently wealthy. I do have to work. I don't have anyone to bail me out, even if everything went wrong. I don't have any parents or, family members or anyone who, would be able to look after me, as it were. So I am very much someone who needs to be on top of everything and
self-reliant.
Self-reliant, thank you. And also, not in a place where I can, retire and not have to worry about money or whatever. So I'm also in that position. But I have to admit, I'm not in the rat race. When I was ill for a while, I was able to take time off work. I was able to afford to pay for all kinds of treatments and stuff like that. I realize a lot of people wouldn't. So I'm kind of in the middle now. But for the early part of my life, from when I first started working at 18, I hated education so much that even though I got top grades at my high school, I left and didn't want to pursue further education. I went to get jobs in like factories and stuff like that. I was on minimum wage. And I was basically on minimum wage or close to minimum wage until I was 30 years old. I would get in more and more debt. It was ridiculous. Like I would apply for a credit card. I think at one point I was on state benefits and I told them my income was £4,000 a year at the time, and they gave me a credit card for £2,000, even though I already had a bunch of other cards. So I'm not blaming, again, I'm someone who takes responsibility, but if I wanted to blame, the outside world, I could say it was very irresponsible of them to let me get into so much debt. And I can see the trap that people get into because, in my case, I guess I was just being indulgent, but I can see, again, if you have dependents, for instance, depending on you, that trap of getting into debt and getting more and more into debt and living paycheck to paycheck, I can absolutely, understand that. And I can imagine how difficult it is to resist that trap and how difficult it is to get out of it once you're in it.
Genetic Insights provides cutting-edge, affordable DNA testing, giving you access to over 500 health reports that can help you in 3 key ways. They may be able to resolve your existing health challenges even when nothing else has worked. Using simple lifestyle changes, their reports can help you reduce your risk of developing future health challenges that you may be genetically predisposed to. And they can help you feel more confident in your health by showing you where you are genetically strong. Unlike most other genetic health testing companies, Genetic Insights tests over 83 million different variations in your genes, guaranteeing 99.7% accuracy across all of their DNA reports. They cover almost every aspect of health, including digestive issues, cardiovascular health, weight loss, hormonal and blood sugar balance, as well as nutrient needs, allergies and intolerances, and so much more. Using their system is quick and easy, and reading the reports is simple. If you've done an Ancestry DNA test, you can simply download your raw DNA data, upload it to the Genetic Insights platform, and within a few hours you will have access to genetic reports which give you a risk score for each specific issue and scientifically validated recommendations based on your individual genetic profile. Everything in your reports are based on scientific studies, and there are citation links throughout every report. If you are serious about optimizing your health and wellness and feeling great, then getting access to your genetic insights reports may be the most important health investment you will ever make. In the reports, not only will you gain insights into how to overcome existing health challenges and avoid future issues, you'll also discover which types of dietary, lifestyle, and even supplement protocols are best for your unique genetics. To get your unique genetic health reports, go to geneticinsights.co and use code REJUVENATE to get 20% off today. That's geneticinsights.co using coupon code REJUVENATE to get 20% off today. No, for sure. I mean, I do remember I had a friend at one point, we were just talking and she was trying to make it and do all these things. And so it was like, okay, if I go do this course, and she ended up spending a whole bunch of money on this course, which then just put her further into this, space. But it was like, okay, well, this is going to help me pay for it if I get to that point. But it was like, there was a whole bunch of money she had to expend that she just didn't have as well. So it's just like, okay, credit cards and this, and it's just tough. It's tough.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is kind of what I got a little bit from that question. Maybe I was just reading into it. YouTube comment, but it's like the system is almost like rigged against you in
Yes.
most cases.
Yes.
And that's really what I wanted to comment on because it's depressing, right? And then speaking of like the world being depressing, the other thing I want to point out about myself, because the advice I'm going to give, I don't want it to sound naive, I guess. So I'm not naive about the level of struggle people go through. I had a reasonable amount of struggle myself. I guess that's what I'm saying. I'm also not naive about the state of the world. To give you one example of that, I read all of David Icke's books, at least the ones that are around, in my early 20s. And while I didn't necessarily believe everything I read, he's a very effective communicator. And I think probably I already didn't have a feeling that those in power were looking after our best interests. But after reading all of those books and a bunch of others like it, like the idea of trusting the government, trusting authorities, that they're after your best interest. Basically, I think most people have no conception of actually how evil a lot of people in power are. And I know you and I had a debate a while ago, 6 months ago or something, about a specific politician, Chrissy, and my point to you is like, not that politician wasn't evil, but it's just that they were typically evil, like they
Right.
all are. And I was
Yeah.
listening, and that one, and what about what this one did, and what about this one did? And I don't think you really had a counterpoint, because there may be some exceptions. There may be, because I don't really know for sure, but like the rule is evil. And when you talk about evil, the things that David Icke asserts that they're doing is pretty wild, but not really if you really think about it. First of all, if you think that, a lot of them with a casual signing of a pen will then lead to like dropping bombs or, killing thousands of people, or destabilizing a government, leading to like, mass chaos and murder and, people having to flee their homes and all of this kind of stuff. This is like business as usual for these people. So the idea that they may also be acting like, for instance, the ancient Incans were, so the ancient Incan society, or the idea that they may be doing things like, a lot of aristocrats throughout history have been alleged to do, whether it's, Vlad the Impaler or Lady Bathory or any of these kind of people. The idea that this may be going on is not crazy to me. So
No, I agree. It was because as well, part of the point in some of the other episodes that we've discussed or we've had, especially when it comes to narcissists, is when you say CEOs of companies or things like that, like they're more leading to psychopathic in nature, and you're like, okay, well then it makes sense that there's all this evil running the country, which is insane, but it's there.
yeah. I mean, I think. Yeah, there's narcissists and there's psychopaths. I think psychopaths are more drawn to government, to be honest, because there's more power there. The narcissists are more drawn to corporations, but there's both in both, definitely. Um, and so, and when I say there's more power there, I mean, very few corporations have like an army that can inflict violence. That's the exclusive domain of governments, usually, mainly. Although obviously there's a heavy amount of overlap, especially at the highest levels between the two. Anyway, so I'm not naive about, and what does that mean if that is true, that a lot of the people in power are that evil? it's, well, you could say, finding out is it could very easily be depressing. I don't necessarily recommend people read David Icke, and the reason is because my experience of it is like over 90% of the book is like just scaring the hell out of people about how awful the world is, and then at the end there's like a very brief bit about you know raising consciousness or something without really enough, in my opinion, enough of an explanation about how to do that. And then and people are left with this deep distrust.
Impending doom. Maybe. I mean, I've never read any of his books, but as well, if you're of a nature where anxiety and things and stress, as we've talked about, and you don't want to increase it, then maybe this should be a pass for you.
Yeah, I was going to say deep distrust, which I think is actually a healthy thing. But then, what you just said, absolutely, impending doom, helplessness, despair, terror, all of these kind of things, and so that is not necessarily helpful. I'm not completely against it either, though, because sometimes, like when I see groups like making certain decisions, whether it's with their wallets or in the voting booth, and I'm like, I don't. I think if everyone had an idea of how evil these people in charge often, not always, but often are, they would not be supporting this so readily and so enthusiastically. And
Right.
so I'm a little bit unsure exactly. But anyway, I guess that's going off the topic a bit. The point I wanted to get to initially is I'm not naive about how evil a lot of the people in charge are, frankly. And speaking of that, I was just listening the other day to an interview of someone who I remember first hearing about in David Icke's books over 20 years ago, someone called Kathy O'Brien, who was a victim of really some horrible stuff. I probably shouldn't say what on this in case it gets the video demonetized, but yeah, she had a book called The Transformation of America, 2 words, Transformation of America, and then a couple of other books. And she's someone who's really been through some, if she's to be believed anyway, which I think so, but I'll leave that up to everyone, been through some horrible stuff. And it's very interesting that, her focus is on helping people heal from trauma. She has another book about overcoming PTSD for people who've been through the kind of horrifying experiences that she has. And she was talking about how ultimately, it's about raising a level of consciousness, and that's the most important thing to do. Because the interviewer actually said, given what you've been through, why have you not decided to end it all, basically? Which is a very interesting, what a question to ask someone. I was
Yeah.
like, wow. But I understand it. You'd understand it as well if you read the book, because I think it was definitely not a negative comment. It was like, I think it came from a place of if I'd have been through what you'd been through, I would have. Like it was so terrible, and how do you have that mental resilience? And surprisingly, her answer wasn't like, oh, because I fight and blah blah blah. It wasn't like an angry response. It was like a response of like raising consciousness, which I thought was very interesting. And it's like, so what does that actually mean? And so that's the technique that I wanted to talk about in this episode, is about the fact that we have what I would call, as close as you can imagine, to a magic power that we all have access to, that some of us do some of the time, but that really is the key to transforming your quality of life. Because to go back to that YouTube comment, it may be true that the external world has a significant impact on your inner world. As you said, maybe you believe more the opposite, Chrissy. I tend to believe more the opposite, but let's say that it's true. But what's also true is that your inner world can impact your external world. That was absolutely my experience. My experience is that I was in that rat race, not terrible, but not great. I had trauma, I was depressed, all the rest of it. And then I changed my consciousness, and I was still dead broke. I was still unhealthy. I was still alone. I was not in a relationship, and I wasn't happy about it. I still had a lot of reasons to feel upset that had upset me many times before. But and I didn't enjoy my work, that I was massively in debt, the whole list. But I remember walking around, and after, studying all this stuff about changing your consciousness for a couple of years, I remember walking around Brighton at the time, the Lanes area, and just having this feeling like none of it, I'm not letting any of it affect me. Like, and it's not even a struggle to not let it affect me. Like a fundamental realization that my consciousness does not have to be dictated by the world outside me, that despite everything going wrong, and there was a bunch of stuff at that time that was all going wrong. I'd just been broken up with. I just had this horrible health issue where I was told a few weeks earlier by a surgeon I was never going to walk again. I've told that story before, so I won't tell it again here because it's a long one. I had invested a bunch of money in a business that went bankrupt. That money wasn't even my money; it was money that I'd borrowed. So I was, really in the hole with debt, and I'd kind of left that job to do that business investment that I did before. So I was hardly having any income. I literally had I didn't have less than £500 in the bank. I had access to less than 500 among all credit cards and loans and everything put together. I was dead broke. And I didn't really have anyone to bail me out, although I was lucky at the time that I had someone who was letting me live for free in their attic. And I remember walking around and be like, this is okay. Like, something inside me had shifted. Like everything that I'd been learning had soaked in, and I was like, I'm not letting my inner state be dictated by my outer state. And very soon after that, everything shifted. I started my business with almost nothing. And within a year, I was successful. I was known within my specific niche. I was traveling the world, meeting new people, in exciting, relationships, and then into a happy marriage. I was healthier, doing better financially than I ever had done, while not being in the rat race, while not doing something I didn't enjoy. Everything had turned around. And so from my perspective, it was the consciousness shift first, then my external environment completely changed. And when you listen to people who are successful, not just with money, but in many dimensions of life, who were not before, which is common, that there's this big turnaround, they tend to say the same thing. They all talk about this eternal shift having to occur first. And I don't want to minimize how difficult that is when your external reality, external world, your material world around you sucks, to make that shift inside you. But it is the most valuable thing you can do. And I actually think it's more important than taking action in the material world, although you have to do that too. So if I'd have kept my level of consciousness at the time, but worked hard to try and get a job and worked hard on my health and all the rest of it, would I be in the, kind of privileged position I'm in now? I don't think there's absolutely no way. No, because I would have, when you are used to losing in life, you have a loser mindset and you take that with you, and you ruin opportunities if they do come along. You often don't see the opportunities. When you expect to lose, you don't always lose, but you're much more likely to lose. And also when you expect to win, you don't always win, but you're more likely to win.
Yeah, there was I'm gonna maybe get this wrong if I'm misremembering it, but it was one of these little quizzes where they test certain things. It's like, okay, do you believe you're lucky? And if you said yes, you were more likely to find the thing. And if you say no, then you pretty much hands down, you never saw it. So just like you said, you'll miss those opportunities. They might be running right in front of you, but you don't believe they're yours for the taking potentially, and you just completely miss them.
Yeah, I think it's, there are issues like you might come along and decide you don't deserve it, blah blah blah. But I think what you said is more primary. You don't even see it. That's usually the case. You're completely oblivious to it. If I think of men talk about this, the amount of women who subtly indicated interest in me that I would have liked, but I had no idea that that's what's going on. It's in my 20s and teens, it just missed opportunities like that. But it's the same for making money. It's the same for a career that you actually enjoy. It's like there are often these little opportunities, openings, invitations that if you are not attuned to it, maybe because you believe you don't deserve it, maybe because you believe that life is harsh and cruel and depressing and nothing good ever happens, maybe because you believe that a certain evil faction is out to get you and nothing good is ever going to happen in the world, like you miss all of that, whatever the reason might be. You miss it. Now, before I get into the how-to of this, I just want to address what another thing that could be potentially off-putting about what I'm recommending to people. And I just want to acknowledge something. So I talked about the downside of both. I don't think I talked about that there is a downside to both perspectives. I don't think I gave the downside yet of the my inner reality is primary perspective. I gave the downside of the material reality. There is a significant downside as well to believing that your inner reality is primary. You don't suffer from this, Chrissy, so don't worry, this isn't a slight of you, because I think you're reasonably balanced. But you and I have met people who have this, I'm sure. When you are too convinced that your inner reality is primary, it tends to go towards narcissism. And the people who most enthusiastically teach this stuff about law of attraction and creating your own reality and all of this kind of stuff, if you know what narcissism is and how to spot it, like you see the traits again and again, and especially if you spend time with these people behind the scenes, you see some of the uglier traits of narcissism from them, while maybe publicly they're talking all good and raising your vibration and creating a great life and attracting blah blah blah. And so why is that? I would say that too much my subjective inner reality is primary means you start to dismiss the importance and the reality of the external world. And you start to believe that you're kind of the center of the universe, basically. And also, more challengingly, you start to believe that you should be the center of the universe. And rather than being grateful when, let's say, you change your reality or you're focusing on, I don't know, something that you want and then it happens, like sometimes there's joy that that's the case and gratitude, well, that's great. But what you tend to notice more and more, the more someone is overly focused on their inner reality and heading towards severe narcissism, is the frustration and the upset and the anger when things do not go their way. So you get kind of the polar opposite where, some people, and maybe I'm projecting a lot on this commenter, but I feel like, some people are like, I feel terrible because my life sucks and, it's hard for me to get out of it. So that's one side of it. But the other side of it is like, I feel terrible because the universe is not conforming to my will and it should. And you actually see a lot of that as well. And I would say like anger is more likely emotion with that side of it, whereas sadness and depression and despair and stuff like that are more the emotions with the other side of it. So with the material reality as primary, you tend to feel helpless. You tend to feel out of control, like there's nothing you can do, which tends to lead more to depression. While on the other side, if you believe that your inner reality does and should strongly influence or even control the external world's material world, then you will be frequently angry, irritated, frustrated, etc., with the fact that it doesn't. And so that's why I really think it is a balance, like we talked about earlier. And I think you do the balance well, Chrissy. But I'm always aiming for the balance, and I think I've mentioned this on previous episodes, but I think it was a long time ago. Like that's why I really love that serenity prayer. God grant me the strength to have the courage to change the things that can be changed. Have the serenity to have the serenity to accept the things that cannot be changed, and the wisdom to know the difference. That's really the key of it to me. So the humility to accept what cannot be changed, but the courage. And does it take courage? I think it takes a few different things. And so that gets me back finally to this technique. I think I'm ready to talk about it. And it's very simply the skill, the technique, the habit, and to start with, just the awareness that you can change your own focus. That's basically it. So, generally, and I'll give some general ones before we get specific. Our tendency, kind of maybe as a default, which is one of the reasons why I have sympathy for people who say that life sucks, because it seems like our default is to focus on the things that we cannot change rather than the things we can. Our default is to focus on the things that are wrong rather than the things that are right. And our default is to focus on, no, let's stick to those two, sorry. So if we just go into those two for a second. So when you focus on the things that you can't change rather than the things you can, it depends a little bit where you're coming from. If you feel like you should be able to change them, you tend to get angry and frustrated. If you feel like you can't and that's just the way it is, you tend to get sad or scared, depending on how bad those things are. And so it's a really bad idea to spend too much time focusing on things you cannot change if you want a good quality of life. So, for instance, with this comment, I think a lot of depression is caused by work and this insane rat race we are living in. A lot of people are living in it. I hope I've acknowledged that sufficiently, during a lot of this episode. I understand that. But not everyone is living in that rat race. Whether you are in a rat race or not is something that you can control. Now, it doesn't necessarily work like magic. That's the thing. When people think of magic, they think of instant. That's always the thing, right? Like the Fantasia cartoon. It's like, like I can instantly just make something happen and I can do it with no effort. It's not that. What it is, though, is to say, like, how can I get out of this rat race? And there may be qualifiers around it because okay, I could escape the rat race, but I have to do something unethical. Okay, well, don't do that then, right? So, doing crime, I guess, is a way of escaping the rat race and still having money, but it's unethical and dangerous. So let's not have that be an option. And so I think, like focusing on the question. So like, oh yeah. So how do you change your focus? There's lots of ways to do it. You can literally, like, if a thought comes into your head, you can literally say out loud in your head, no, and force yourself to think of something else. That's an underrated technique, by the way, especially if you have these kind of looping thoughts of anxiety or anything like that. Like, just to say, no, I'm not thinking about that right now. Let me think about, look, there are high quality things you could change your focus to, but for a moment, let's think about what did I think of the latest episode of the Kardashians? Let me think about the latest YouTube video I watched. Let me think about what color I want to redecorate my bedroom to. Do you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't even have to be an amazing thing that you refocus on. Just anything that's even, I don't know, a distraction is better than just focusing on really negative. And what if this happens? And then disaster and panic and like just breaking that with a no and making yourself focus on something else. Now you notice that.
I was going to say, before you move on to that next little bit, sometimes though I would counter, especially if somebody has a whole bunch of momentum built up behind what they've been thinking out, it's hard to shift out of that.
It is difficult. One of the reasons for that is biology. It is, your neurochemistry, a lot of step 4, your neurochemistry and your hormones. And that's why I've focused more on that in the Rejuvenate podcast. Yes, if your cortisol's high, if your GABA's low, all of this kind of stuff. Absolutely. But I would say the hormones are like the force behind these things. They're like the energy behind it. So when you optimize those hormones, whether it's by healthy living or by cheating, and I'm not against cheating, especially as it gets older, because it's pretty much impossible to have optimal levels of hormones by the time you're, say, 50, for a woman certainly, and arguably for a man as well. So absolutely, you can shift your hormones, you can shift your neurotransmitters, and it makes it a lot easier to change your focus. It can be very difficult to change your focus. Now, here's the thing. Actually, let me talk about this technique, and I'll talk about how to apply it. So when I was giving the examples earlier, you'll notice they were just a bunch of questions. And so that's the real way you change your focus. I know I just said no, but no is just like an interrupt. If you don't do something else, you'll go, as you said, right back into it very quickly. What you actually need to do is ask a different question. So let's say that you're having thoughts about, I hate my job, I hate the fact that I can't quit, I hate this, I hate that, or I'm depressed about this, I'm depressed about that. So a better quality of question might be like, how can I escape the rat race? But of course, there's loads of low quality answers to that. Well, you could, be homeless and start taking meth and, wandering around the streets like a lot of people in your city may be doing. That is a way to escape the rat race, but it's not a high quality answer, right? I gave another example. You can do crime, and there's low level crime and there's also high level crime, right? Maybe you know someone who's quite wealthy, but you know that they're involved in some shady stuff, even if it has government approval or corporate approval or whatever. Okay, but you can say, I'm not willing to do that either. So you can just refine it with a better quality question. How can I escape the rat race? It's an okay question if you're mainly focused on the rat race. But then it's like, how can I escape the rat race in an ethical way? But what does escape the rat race really mean? Well, how can I make enough money that I don't constantly have to be worried about not having enough money, for instance? Or how can I make enough money that I actually feel comfortable or that I feel abundant? These are all kind of upgrades. How can I do all of that in a way that I actually enjoy rather than is like suffering and struggling and that I hate every day and hate what I have to do? How can I have, how can I be financially abundant while doing what I enjoy while maintaining or improving my health? Let's add that in there as well, right? A lot of people doing what they love and earning lots of money, and they are wearing their body down to the ground. They are prematurely aging themselves, and they eventually come to see people like me. So how about while I'm actually looking after my body and my health at the same time? So ethical, while you enjoy it, while looking after your body. What other dimension you want to add in there? Well, maybe you feel kind of empty because maybe your job is lonely. Okay, so while being around people that I really enjoy being around. Okay. Or maybe you feel empty and depressed because you feel like what you do, maybe it's not that bad, but it's meaningless. So, okay, while doing something that I feel is really significantly contributing to the world, right? So, like, you upgrade the question more and more. And beyond a certain level of upgrading the question, you're going to feel like, oh, I can't. This is impossible, right? But the funny thing is, even asking the question, especially if you do it repeatedly, even if you don't have an answer straight away, there is an immense value of asking the question because the subconscious or God or the universe or whatever you want to call it, like something starts working on it. Like even if you can't, and I remember when I first asked these kind of questions, I could not comprehend it. I could not visualize it. I could not think it. I could not imagine what it was like to have the quality of life, even that I have now when I was in my late 20s. No way. It was a million miles away from me. As you said earlier, like interrupting a certain way of thinking is not easy in one go. But just asking that quality of question and asking it repeatedly, it's better to write it down. And really think about it, and don't be upset or frustrated or anything if you don't come up with an answer. The act of asking the question kind of starts these fundamentally different processes inside you that actually do lead to an answer. And even if it's not that dream scenario that we just refined it to first time, what you'll find is it's still a significant upgrade from what you're going through now. So focusing on what you can control, right, is really crucial. So let's say you hate your job, and a lot of people asking the question, a lot of people are like, oh, I hate my boss. Why can't my boss just be nicer to me and something like that? Well, you may be able to get your boss to be nicer to you. Maybe if you're nicer to them, maybe you can flatter them, charm them. Maybe you can find the qualities they like in a person, display them more and all the rest of it. So you can influence your boss's behavior, but you can't control your boss's behavior, right? In the end, maybe they're just a mean person. Maybe they're just an angry person. Maybe they're just whatever. There's only so much influence you can have over that, but no control, or just influence at best. And so I think, or a lot of people like, how can I get a promotion? Or how can I earn more money, but within the job that they've got? And so those are not terrible questions. They're certainly better than, focusing on, oh, I hate my life, I hate my job. But like upgrading it to be a better quality of question, like I remember Ricky Gervais talking about this. Like a lot of people have fantasies about like having a time machine so they could go back and buy Apple stock or Bitcoin or whatever it might be. And he's always like you don't have to break the rules of time and space. You just want money. It's like it's like it's not that hard. And so I think a lot of people make it a lot more difficult by trying to change things that they can't control, like other people's nature or the nature of an industry. Let's say your job right now is just backbreaking hard work, for instance. Like, maybe you can get a role within that industry where you're sitting behind a desk instead or something like that. But, maybe it's just the nature of that. Or let's say you have a lot of fear and you're working in, I don't know, the military, right? It's like, sure, you can get a safer job that's not on the front lines and still within the military. But if your primary issue is that you just feel a lot of anxiety, maybe being in a war zone is just not a good idea in general, even if it is working in the kitchen. Maybe you'd be better off, I don't know, working in a kitchen, but doing it in a, nice, safe city in a safe country where you feel at home. Like, do you know what I mean? Like a lot of people are thinking too small and too close to where they already are rather than imagining a massive shift away, which is really not that difficult to achieve.
No, I hear you. And going back to my own personal experience, and this is going to be on a much more, a homely level here for me, but, especially having young kids and when back then and being so busy and all of this and being in that mindset of like, oh, and the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And what I had to do, because there's always laundry, tons and tons of laundry. You get through it and then there's the next batch and the next batch. And instead, what I was finding myself getting was overwhelmed and being frustrated and all that kind of stuff. I was like, you know what? I love clean clothes. I love getting into my bed with clean sheets. Well, guess what? I got to do the laundry to get those clean sheets. So what I would do is when I was folding, I would just focus on that, how much I love clean clothes. And so I was able to help shift myself out of that instead of looking at it like, oh, and another load. It's like, oh, I've got clean, look at all these clean clothes. I mean, that's so minor, but that really helped me shift from that focus to this focus and feeling much better about it because no matter what, I was going to be in it.
No, it's fantastic. And actually, that's number 3, which I hadn't listed yet, but you've skipped ahead to that. So let's do that one next. So most people are focusing on the process when they should be focusing more on the outcome. That's what you just said there, which is absolutely true and fantastic. Some, some things are inevitably difficult and a struggle, and not a lot worth achieving happens effortlessly. This is one of the lies as well of the personal development space that, everything should just fall in your lap with no effort by yourself if you're just attuned enough and manifesting right and, attracting enough and all the rest of it. Some people have those kind of lives, admittedly, where things fall in their lap a lot. I've actually been one of those people at certain periods of my life, certainly not others. But the problem with that is, there is more to life than getting what you want. I personally think that a lot of the purpose of life is to build virtues inside yourself. I think that, a lot doesn't survive death. I think maybe the virtues that you develop during your life do. How they do, I'm not going to speculate. Obviously, in a traditional religious culture, you'd be rewarded by going to heaven or whatever. But the point is, like, developing virtues, I think, is like the purpose of life, and I think it also partly explains why life is not easy. So all the stuff that people are resentful about, like life is so difficult, and we talked about earlier, nature can be cruel and ruthless, and etc., etc., etc. It's an opportunity to develop various virtues. And, one of those virtues is courage that we talked about earlier, the push through fear. And another one is, persistence or endurance, to persist despite difficulty, despite struggle. And but how, so, a lot of people heard, I think most people feel that way. If we think about someone who is heroic, both male or female, probably the two primary qualities we'll think of is one, courage, but two, like endurance, that they don't give up no matter what, right? And however, a key to that is to focus, as you just said, Christy, on the outcome rather than the process. Think about like something where it's been very systematized, like special forces training. I've met a few people who've been through that. If while you're doing that, you're constantly focused on what is going on with you right now, which is usually, one person said like special forces training is just, you just learn to suffer. That's what they said. It's learning to be okay with suffering. And yeah, one of the most powerful techniques for that is to focus on the outcome. Those people are doing that because they want to be the best of the best or whatever it may be. They're not focused on the struggle that they're going through right now. And so, I've my own example of that. When I was, one of the best ways to view that to me is a technique that I've been using for well over 10 years now. I used it, many times a few years ago when I kept going for this really bad pain that painkillers didn't help for. And I would always try and reframe it, and I'd ask the question, what would have to happen in the future for me to be able to look back at this moment right now of all this suffering and say, I'm so thankful that I went through that. That was totally worth it. So you can see that's a pretty high quality of question, which is why I want to share it with you, especially if you are suffering or struggling, or to remember to ask when you are suffering or struggling. Like, just like trying to visualize a time when you will not be in pain or when you will not be suffering is quite difficult, but a very good thing to do when you are. But asking trying to visualize getting to a point where things are so much better, you're grateful for the suffering. That's a really difficult thing to do, but it's actually a fantastic challenge because it reframes the whole thing in your brain. It lets you think about, because first of all, obviously, it allows you to visualize feeling better, which is great because, as we said, the internal does have an impact on the external, including the body. But second of all, it actually transforms the meaning of what you're going through, because pain and suffering, well, let's put it this way. This is playing with words a bit, but let's just say pain is kind of inevitable in life, but suffering is not. Suffering is where the pain you're going through seems meaningless or even, cruel, like a punishment, unnecessary, whatever it might be. If you're going through pain, but it feels like it is meaningful, like it is worth it, there is still pain, but there is no suffering. And so by asking that question of what can I imagine in the future, what situation would I have to be in, what would I be like as a person? What would my external world be like? For me to be able to look back at this moment and say, wow, I'm so glad I went through that. That first of all imagines a time when that pain is over. And when I say pain, it could be, heartbreak. It could be a lot of different things. It doesn't have to be physical pain. But it first of all, it'll actually clearly visualize a time when that pain is completely gone. But second of all, it makes the pain that you're going through right now meaningful. And that's why I think it's a really powerful question. So that's a shift in focus. It's kind of an emergency one, but it's one that I very highly recommend.
In an ideal world, you'd meet all of your nutritional needs in the form of vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients, and more from the foods you eat. However, unless you prepare all of your food at home from scratch using the highest quality ingredients possible, the reality is that most of us need some nutritional support. Most of us need to take supplements if we want to look, feel, and perform at our best on a consistent daily basis. And this is especially true if you have genes that give you an elevated need of certain nutrients. And this is where Feel Younger can help. What I love about Feel Younger is that they offer a huge range of quality supplements and healthcare products formulated and endorsed by Elwin Robinson, including must-haves like magnesium glycinate and vitamins B12, D3, and K2. And they do it at affordable prices with free shipping for orders over $50 without ever compromising on quality, purity, or potency. To learn more about how Feel Younger supplements can give your health a boost while supporting this podcast, please visit feelyounger.net and use promo code REJUVENATE to get 20% off your first order. That's promo code REJUVENATE for 20% off your first order at feelyounger.net. That's a really good point of, I love these techniques. So going through, just to quickly recap, and please correct me if I do get them wrong, is that number one, ask yourself a different question, because that's going to help you do a significant upgrade into where you are in the moment and get you beyond it. The second one is focus on what you can control. Third one is focus on the outcome. And then with this one, you were just saying, I'm not sure if this was number 4, but the thing that you've been practicing recently with your technique is, how can I look back? What would need to happen in the future for me to look back and make this pain, the suffering that I'm going through, meaningful? Those are all extremely helpful techniques.
And sorry, not to nitpick, but not just meaningful. The meaningful is the reason why you asked the question.
Right.
The question is, what would make me look back on, maybe I didn't actually define it, so let me define it as well as I can right now. What would make me be able to look back at this moment in pain and be grateful that I went with it, and say, I'm so glad I went through this. This is the best thing that ever happened to me because it led to, and then whatever it is that would make it all worthwhile for you.
Yeah. No, those are excellent things. And the thing is too, Elwin, and this happens a lot with you, which I do adore and love, but sometimes I'm like, well, yeah, of course. Like it seems so obvious, but it's not. And that's why I love when you break it down and you put it here so succinctly and just like, yeah, it's like, yeah, that makes absolute sense. Oh, okay. Now the key is it's the awareness and the remembering of when you're in it.
Yes. Well, that's the key for you, someone who's at your level. But there are a lot of people, and as I said, I was one of them, maybe more than you ever were, who really are just in a level of victim consciousness, I call it. And that is where, their inner state is entirely dictated by their external reality. And when that's the case, the external reality is rarely good. I think that's the point I really want to get across to people. I realize there are people born into a lot of privilege, as I talked about, and I'm not just talking about money and connections. I'm talking about whatever, all kinds of things. Maybe they're naturally charming, maybe they're naturally, whatever, that makes things easier for them in life. I get that, but still overall, and also those people who I've noticed who are born in, various different types of privilege, they do have an underlying anxiety, because generally, unless they're very arrogant, they are aware that all the good things that are going on in their life are not real, that they're entirely dependent on circumstance, that they're not created by them, that they're just given to them. And I've had conversations with people who are in this position. And, like with money, for instance, I've met people who are born into money and have always had money. And on one hand, they're in a good position because they don't have a lot of hang-ups around money that people who've been poor do. But one of the things they have is they have a real fear that if it were ever taken away or lost, they have no idea how to get it back. They have no idea how to get it. Whereas people who are self-made, who have created, who started with nothing and made money, often they kind of have lost it all before and they've made it right back again. And so I guess what I'm saying is, if you could say to someone, what would you rather have? Would you rather have $1 million, or would you rather have the certainty based on skill and experience that you can make $1 million? Most people would say, I'd rather have $1 million, please. I've got a bunch of bills to pay. I've got this and that. But actually, the latter is far more valuable because $1 million, we see this, talk about studies. There's a study of lottery winners, right? And how within a short period of time, I think it was 3 years, the vast majority of them have lost it all and have ended up in more debt. And that's because your problem, if you are broke, which again, most of us are by the definition I gave earlier, is not so much that you don't have money, it's that you don't have the mindset to be able to make and keep and grow money. And that's not something that can be given to you. That's only something that can be uh, earned and developed through work and effort. And maybe the work and effort is in changing your focus, not necessarily in struggling hard at a job, but nonetheless, like the work and effort that is necessary to get there. Yeah, so for techniques, I boil it down into three fundamental things with examples, Chrissy. So we talked about two of them already. Number one is focusing on what you can control rather than what you can't. Number three, which you jumped ahead to, so it became number two, is focusing on the outcome rather than process. But the third one I do want to touch upon because it's very important, but also because I think it can be I think it's taught really badly and there are problems with it. And I want to address those and say why it's still worth looking at. And it's focusing on the positive rather than the negative. So this is kind of maybe a version, or let's put it differently. Focusing on what you do want rather than what you don't want. Let's put it that way. And I know I've already given examples that contain that, but let me explain, what this matters. So what you can control rather than what you can't control. When people complain about the weather, it's like, I do it sometimes. It's been hot recently. It's like, but I can't control the weather. I can't control how hot it is. Now, I can cool myself down with air conditioning, cold shower, whatever. That's something that I can control. So I can control my temperature if I want to cool down or in fact warm up, but I can't control the outside, right? Well, most people, they focus wrong. They focus on the weather rather than their own internal temperature. And you can take that as an analogy for money, relationships, health, all kinds of things, This is why in the health world, for instance, I don't really focus on chemtrails or 5G towers, things like that. It's not that I don't believe it may be a thing or it may even be a big thing. It's because I can't do anything about it. The only thing you can do really about chemtrails is move to the southern hemisphere because they seem to be almost all in the northern hemisphere. The only thing you can do about 5G maybe is to move in the middle of nowhere. So if it's important to you, then do those things. Awesome, great. But focusing on these things and not doing these things is just creating internal tension. There's nothing you can do about it, right? Well, it's the same with the focusing on what you don't want instead of what you do want. Now, I do think you can go too far with this. Just like you can go too far with thinking that everything comes within you and become a full-blown narcissist and become very frustrated every time things are not conforming to what, your manifesting power or whatever you want to call it. So that's kind of the danger with that. The danger of trying to focus too much on what you do want and what you don't want, it's also a tendency that narcissists have, to be honest. But the issue I have is the ostrich in the sand, like head in the sand thing. So I've noticed people who are too much into the personal development world, they don't want to hear anything negative. And the problem about that is whatever you ignore for too long will eventually come and bite you in the butt. So I am not advocating for that. I'm not advocating for ignoring negative feedback and things that you don't want. What I am encouraging is that you have full awareness of those things. Again, which is not how most people practice this when they learn about this technique. Maintain full awareness, but then shift the focus. So for instance, if the thing that you don't want is to be broke, then there's not much value in focusing on being broke all the time. But there's also not much value to me of pretending you're not broke.
Exactly.
And that's usually the technique used by these people into positive thinking. Not always, but a lot of the time. It's just ignore the reality, Or if you're overweight and you don't want to be overweight, pretend I'm not overweight, Or if you are unsuccessful in relationships, but you want to be in one and be like, oh, actually, I don't want to be in a relationship. But you do really, but you're going to pretend you don't because you don't want to face the pain of like not having what you want, of not having that negative. And I could give tons more examples, but you get the idea. So be aware of the thing that is not the way you want it to be, but then spend most of the time focusing on a resolution to that, which, by the way, will include elements of things you can control rather than things you can't, and the outcome you want rather than the process, right? So if you, let's say it's, let's say the rat race, let's say you hate your job and you're barely making enough money. I'm going to assume that's what that person meant. If not, again, it's what most people are going through. So let's talk about that. So if you're in that situation, focusing on, I don't, I hate my job. I really don't like it. I hate the fact I have to do this. I'm depressed about this. I'm sad about this. I feel like I'm never going to escape. Da, 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 da. These are the kind of thoughts that people have over and over and over again. I'm not good enough. This person doesn't like me. Why don't they like me? That's a good question to ask for a narcissist who never asks that question, who always assumes it's the other person's fault. So, but it's a terrible question to ask for someone who has low self-esteem, who's always asking that question. And so it's really like a balance thing, like asking, why am I broke? Why does no one like me? Why do I always seem to end up with jobs that I hate? All that kind of thing. Those are reasonable questions to ask. Talk about with a friend, a therapist, a religious leader, whoever you trust to give, some helpful advice. But it's the excessively focusing on any of these things without shifting the focus is really what I would challenge. And so it's like, become aware of the problem. Don't pretend the problem's not there. No ostrich head in the sand thing. Acknowledge the problem, but then focus on how can I, things you can control, create outcome that I actually want. And so to do that, there's quite a few pitfalls that you have to avoid, right? So you have to avoid getting caught up in thinking about what you don't want, and you have to push it to what you do want. Next, you have to avoid focusing on all the things that you have no control over and sticking to just focusing on the things that you do have control over. And then, and this is, actually, I think I have this problem more than any other, you have to avoid being overly focused on all the things you have to do to get there, the process, and focus more on the outcome, because otherwise you can get too lost in process. One of the central truths that I learned in the personal development world, what I think is absolutely right, is whatever you focus on tends to magnify. Whatever you focus on, you will tend to experience more of. Now, do those things actually increase in the external world? I would say yes, but you don't even have to believe that. But the more that you focus on problems, the more problems you will experience.
It's very true, because here's the other part about it as well, is like if you just suddenly have focused on the color red, 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 suddenly you see, oh yeah, there's that red thing, there's that red thing, there's that red, it's there more and more and more. It's suddenly you're looking for it. It's showing up.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And also, and this is to back up your point, if you're focused too much on what you need to do to get somewhere, you will just have more and more and more things show up that need to be done. And I think, as I said, out of the three, that's probably the one I'm the most guilty of still. And you can kind of, I think each of those, although it's a generalization, it's definitely a generalization, there's some truth to this, depending on your emotional tone, probably tells you what you get wrong. If you, it tends to be if you're focusing too much on things that you can't control. Again, it varies, but overall, it'll be like anger or frustration. If you're focused on the process too much, it tends to be anxiety. And if you're focused on the things that you don't want, it tends to be like depression and sadness. And so, if you have, and that's again, it's a big generalization. I realize there's many exceptions, but just say that to say, if you know that generally your issue is anxiety, then you might know that the most important switch you need to make is from focusing too much on what needs to be done to focusing on the outcome that you want to achieve. Or if you're angry all the time, you should probably consider if you can switch, focusing less on things you can't control and more on things that you can control. And if you are sad a lot, then focus less on all the things that are not the way that you want them and start focusing more on the things that are the way you want them, which often relates, brings about feelings of gratitude, appreciation, and happiness.
Wow. I love it when we do these kinds of episodes because there's just so much in the mental frame of health, wellness, and everything else that yes, there's the physical aspect, but it's also to up here, because if you're not focused, focus is not the right word, but sort of is in a way, what's going on here in your mental realm, it's significantly impacts your external realm, as we said. And these are the things, especially if you don't feel happy, or you feel sad, or you feel angry, or you feel frustrated, there's some tools here for somebody to be able to identify and go, well, hang on a minute. Am I really focused on the things that I don't have? Oh, okay, maybe that's why I'm feeling sad. So there's the ability to change that. And it's not that you need to go to a doctor necessarily and go do all those kind of things. There's some steps at home you can take. Now, we're not taking the hormones and those bits and the nutrients and all those aspects out of the equation. There's synergistic bits to help each other, but it is in that moment that you can shift it and you can change it.
Absolutely. And I want to acknowledge, the last point you made there. Absolutely. Some toxins can make everything I just said a lot more harder to implement. Some nutritional deficiencies can make it a lot harder to implement. Some hormonal imbalances can make it a lot harder to implement. And so if you're like, I've tried all this before, and I just can't do it, it doesn't work, then you probably need to work on the level of biology again. But I think part of it is also just habit, which is why I've done this episode. I think it's easy, especially if you're not like really in tune with this stuff all the time, which I'm not. I'm kind of fairly normal mainstream perspectives all the time, to forget the central truth. And if you only remember one thing from this episode, I want it to be this: like, you can change your focus. You can choose to change your focus. That's the fundamental thing, which is hard to remember in the heat of the moment, but which is super important. Exactly how and exactly what to is more the details, which we've covered obviously in detail in the second half of the episode. But just the fact that you can change your focus is the most fundamentally important thing to remember. Like, on my phone, I don't have a picture of me or anything. I have a picture of just a reminder that I am able to change my focus. That's like just written down in words. It's just like, because I just want that to be there to constantly remind me at every time. You could put a poster up or whatever. It may seem cheesy, or like just anything that frequently reminds you that you can change your focus, that you, whatever it is that you are habitually in the habit of thinking or feeling, because the two are heavily intertwined. It's not a given. You have a choice about that being there. It may not be easy to shift it, depending on a lot of different factors. Once something is habitual and it's been going on for decades, that's a pretty deep groove that it's very easy to go down. It's difficult to go down a different track. I understand that. When you have a lot of, hormonal imbalances, maybe caused by toxins or whatever, that's a lot of force pushing you down a certain track. I understand that too. But fundamentally, even when you're in that terrible position, as I said, I was, a few years ago, probably will be again in my life. I want to be a realist, even though I'm not trying to create that for myself. I also want to live in the real world. I'm going to do my best to remember in those moments that I can change my focus. That's the most important thing.
Beautiful words. Absolutely beautiful words. Because then again, the power is with us.
Yes.
Absolutely. Well, Elwin, again, I love it when we do these episodes. It'll be right up there for me, because it's simple, but not, but is in this wonderfully, beautifully strange way. And
it's
again,
simple but difficult. That's how
yes,
I would describe it.
Yes, exactly. No, it's really, really good. Yeah. Anything else before? I think we're coming up to time. So anything else before we close for our lovely listeners?
Just all the usual. Please like, subscribe, comment. As you saw, I just did a whole episode based on the comments, so you never know. Your one may be next. Comment and share, and see you next time. Hey, thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed that, I recommend watching our latest episode, which you can do by clicking above. And make sure to subscribe, like the video, comment, and share with anyone who you think might appreciate it. Thank you.